No. Yeah. Yeah. I think she, yeah. I think she's been there for a while, but she just moved up to the 8. Now she's thinking about quitting. I think, you know, yeah, and I think the political grind. Exactly. Actually, I'm an actor. Yeah, I hit the same bump. That's all I'm going to do with the ballet. 6 years.
I think we're going to lose corner man here.
All right, well, we better pack it up.
Well, actually, pull it back. We could just, because I don't want to get the end of the table, dude. Just pull back a little bit and raise it up a little bit.
Oh, yeah, good idea. But then the headroom, that's going to look sucky.
Hi, so we're going to start off by making sure that you can hear us with these mics. I know you can hear me. Sure, okay?
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Move them just a little closer.
A little closer. Rob?
How's that?
Wonderful section.
No, we were friends. They were very good friends of the Cowles. The Cowles and I were very good friends, so I met all the Cowell friends. We went around together.
Well, it seems to me, I heard you mention this morning that the resources, Cowell's resources of music was influential. That was 1930. That was
Musical resources,
musical
yeah.
resources. Would
Yep.
you say that
It
was
still is.
your Bible? In a sense,
One of
that
them,
was your
yeah.
beginning point?
There are many writers. Yes.
In putting, bringing the two of you together, it seems to me that we have a wonderful opportunity to look back at the 30s and 40s. In some ways, I might say it seems as almost a heyday of activity with Rieger and Cowell and everybody in a mix of inventing a new music for dance and collaborating. I wonder if I'd like to think we can look back and reminisce about that and storytell. And I'd also like us to project into the future a little bit. I think we'd like to know what your ideas are about what's happening now and what directions you can see for the future. There was from Dance Service, of which you have an article right here that you wrote in early writing.
Oh, did I write something?
Sure you did. Yeah, I'll call you once in a while. But here, another early writer, of course, was John Cage in 1939. Henry Cowell, John Cage got together, and there's an article. And it was gold. New music, new dance. Percussion music is revolution. And then it goes on. Have we gone very far from the 1930s move?
I don't know. And one of the reasons I don't know is that I don't go to enough dance concerts. And also, I don't know what is happening in the studios in the way of accompaniment. And that's the daily bread of both dance and music. It's what happens. I don't know if people are using more percussion or less percussion. And I don't know what other instruments they're using to enrich dance accompaniment in the classroom. And I think that's an important thing. They're probably not using grand pipe organs.
When you heard the musicians playing this morning,
Yeah.
the dance class, did that bring back memories about being at Mills in 1939 and being competition?
Yes, and also by reason of the fact that percussion was used. I used a great deal of it. And by reason of the fact that Henry Cowell introduced me to Tina Flauta, and Henry Cowell's influence was still there. He was an important person at Mills College from early on, as a matter of fact. And by early on, I mean 30s, early 30s. And when I went there, I used a lot of percussion as well as some piano. As a studio accompanist, which I've done centuries of, the last time I did it was a couple decades ago, I guess. Maybe more. Yeah, maybe more. And what I used to have was a VW van, which I filled with drums, gongs for hanging and gongs for on felt, and sets of flower pots, sets of dragon's mouths, and flutes, recorders, Chinese xiao, and like that. And then this was beside the piano, so I would slip up and down from the floor to the piano. I played percussion and flutes on the floor, but the piano was always there. I also used the inside of the piano with frequency, having, of course, no technical techniques. So I used a great number of things which were reflections of what I had known and what other people were using too. I did this for a number of years, not too many centuries ago.
Well, Henry Cowell then was a strong
my mentor.
He was
Yes,
your
my
mentor.
mentor of mentors.
And your
Yes.
mentor. And by then, he had already created dance of work for Charles Weidman in 31. He had done Salutation 1935 for Haunting Home, and Martha Graham's Heroic Dance 31, and for Casual Development. There were numbers of collaborations that he did, and I'm sure he used the elastic
One of his
technique.
great ones too is Deep Song.
And Deep Song, of course, is the one that
May I just parenthesize here that I have, in one of my notebooks, my composition notebooks, I have a copy of Salutation. I was so entranced by the piece that I asked the musician to loan me, and I copied it out, so I have a copy of it in my notebook. It was, yeah, it was a beautiful illustration of what Henry maintained, that a very large part of the music of the world consists of a melody supported by rhythm. And that's what that was. And it was by melody too. I loved it. Still at it.
Well, David, jump in anytime, but I know from reading Dance Observers that you wrote a work, and I don't know if it was your first work, in 1939-40 for Marion Van Tile, this was Lou, at Mill. Was that when you were a dance accompanist?
Yeah,
Oh,
she succeeded Gina Plata,
Mhm.
whom I had worked for before. And then Marion came from Chicago. And she was a strict Graham teacher and dancer. And that was completely different from Tina, who was, of course, direct from the bebop school. And so it made a difference. It was also something I was affected by as a musician very much, because the bebop school and also the Humphrey Biden school, where they went towards things rhythmically, that sort of thing. Whereas the Graham technique was sitting on the first beat of the bar. It went rum, 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 so on. But it was on the downbeat and then successive beats. So it was a reverse of rhythm. It's a little bit like the problem that when Westerners first take up Javanese music, they look at groups of four notes, and they think 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. It isn't that way. It's at all. It's better use the countdown. It's 4, 3, 2, 1, 4, 3, 2, 1, and that's the difference between the Graham thing that I encountered musically in Marion, and the Plata, and also the other dancers, Horton, for example, going towards a goal tone or a goal mood or a goal beat. Very different rhythmically, very different rhythmic feeling, I should say. Effective, actually.
Tina worked with Henry Cole,
Yes,
and
before.
so
And he
the
recommended
German
me for her.
influence of using percussion was very strong.
Oh, yes, I think my school used to go out. Yeah.
And Francesca Boas was around at Mills, I know,
If she was,
that
I didn't
summer, and
know.
then at Bennington, and also working with Anya Holmes and teaching percussion for dance.
I didn't know that.
Well, where were you in 1939?
I was doing writing the music for an assistant choreographer for a ballet that unfortunately was the last thing that was ever done by the Federal Theater in New York. I was doing it with Bertha Oxner, whose husband married Marion Van Tile.
Oh, yes, yes, that was Cambridge.
And from that, Martha, I had known Martha for quite a while, and she got hold of me after the ballet was over and asked me what I wanted to do next, and I said I wanted to join your company. And she said, I wouldn't advise it, I'll castrate you. And I said, well, depends on how much I like him. She was right. For about 2 years, I found that I was leaping for her and not for myself, and so obviously I couldn't get off the ground. But anyway, I had felt that I was only 19, 20 then, that my facility had taken me as far as I could go, and I needed a slave driver, and I got it. including Louis Horst. If I can just tell a quick story on him, he was a monster. He was a darling monster. But, God, he was difficult. And I went through 2 years of his pre-classic forms and modern forms. And one day I had an air primitive study to do. And I finished it. And he said, "That would have been very nice if you had done it behind a banana tree with a curtain down." And I said, "Louis, that's a stinking lie." I said, "I know. If you want to examine the form, I have the form here. I know the texture's right. You don't know what you're talking about." And he said, "That's right." But he said, "If you don't know yourself enough to challenge your teacher, you don't know yourself well enough to present yourself to the public." He said, "You don't have to come back." And he was a toughie.
You joined the Graham Company 1940. That was
The first thing I did was Letter to the World.
Letter to the World and then Punch in the Judy, the Johnson collaboration. Were you in the Letter to the World was 1940, starting in Bennington. So you went to Bennington practically right away.
Well, I was studying. I've been taking class.
Right. And Martha invited you to be in the company at that point.
Right.
Can you talk about that Hunter Johnson collaboration for Letter to the World?
It was chaotic. I really can't say too much about that. I mean, a lot of the time she would do a ballet or a dance, and the music would be written afterward, which was one of Louis' insistences that the dance not be dependent upon music, but that she have a formal structure that he could write the music to. And she did this for quite a long time. But Hunter Johnson wrote the music, and she worked with it. It was a very, very tempestuous time. It was, let's see, Hanya Holm was up there, Humphrey Wiseman, and Martha. So you can imagine there was a certain amount of electricity in the air. It was just a very exciting time.
I actually have a Bennington catalog from that summer, and it's interesting to me to look at it in these days because I noticed that if you were there, you had the choice of taking rhythmic basis for dance with Norman Lloyd, accompaniment for dance, music composition for the dance. They were inviting students to also take other music courses within the curriculum. Were you writing music at that point, or did you just totally give up and just dance?
Norman Lloyd had a percussion group, and he had, as I remember, 9 or 10 students, and he asked me if I would write a piece of music for the group, which I did. And it was very exciting. And he was a wonderful guy working, just marvelous.
So you were holding 2 hats from the time you entered into the Graham Company.
Right. I didn't do any music professionally until I left her. And this thing in Bennington wasn't professional. I mean, he wanted a percussion ensemble, and I kicked in.
So for you as a dancer working in a new piece, the concept of being able to make a score part of a musical ensemble was an easy one. The Bennington allowed that kind of cross-fertilization.
It was extremely meaningful. I more and more felt at that time, I agreed with Louis, that the dance should have a structure. And even if you danced to somebody else's music, that you should have an absolute a form, which usually had musical forms, the ABAC or whatever, few canons. But I'm not being anywhere near as exciting as this guy is.
Well, Lou, this business of collaboration and what comes first, music or dance, and the Forrest Graham collaborative process that had to do with Martha coming up with the idea, with the dance idea becoming first, and then the music working in collaboration. What do you think about that now that you've just finished a commission with Mark Morris? Would you rather have been in the studio with Mark, making the work?
Well, I think being in any studio with Mark is an occasion, of course, a magnificent one. But we had come to terms about that, and I also had, in some long distance, done a piece with Eric Hawkins before, which was almost as loose. There was only one point after I gave Eric the music, this was for New Moon, when it was last week, that he said, well, he would prefer to have something there, and I changed it, made a new piece for him, and it was good. But otherwise, it was really almost as loose as the work from Mark Morris. But almost all the other dances have been to the dance. And, yes, and the counts, the structure of the dance. I will say, too, that one of the pieces I least wanted to compose, but did do, and is still holding Lords, was the ballet Solstice for Jean Erdmann. And this came about, I found out, because she already had a score for it, but she didn't like it. So she asked me to fill in, as it were. And I was interested in other things at the time, so I didn't want to do it. But I did do it anyway, because I raised the price and told her that I'd have to have certain instruments. Oh, fine, and so on. And she was happy and able to provide everything I asked. So I did, and I'd always subconsciously and consciously wanted to write a pentatonic piece. This is a long piece. It's, 28 or 30 minutes, even longer. And so I simply made a structure so that it would come out on a key system, went through like this and came out like that. And then assigned the various pentatonic modes in the pieces, at least 2 for each piece, throughout it. Now this, mind you, is to the counts that I had already taken down in the studio for each movement and and talked with Jean about the feeling of the movements. So I did, and we did it, and we've never changed it. And I've never heard that original score, and I have no idea what it's like. But this piece has survived very well. There's a very good CD with it, and another one is about to be made, and it is given concert performances all the time.
Without the dance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it has survived as music.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see.
You did see the movement. Jean
Oh,
did
mercy,
show you-
yes.
Yeah,
Oh,
the
yes, and I
dance
took
was
it all
finished.
down
Yeah.
as I always had.
Uh-huh.
And I suppose it's probably time to tell the story about Tina at this point. When I was working at Mills with Tina, she asked me to compose a dance for her. And I said, all right, I'll try, Tina. And so she showed me what she had done, and I took down counts, yes, as I was accustomed to doing. I'd been working with dancers for a number of years before. So I took down the counts and feeling in the notes to myself of what was up. Went home to San Francisco and wrote to that, and came back to Mills, and it went along for a number of measures, and then it didn't. It didn't work. The counts were different, the feeling was different, and so on. And so then I thought, well, I made a mistake, and I took the counts again with more notes about the feeling and structure, and went home to San Francisco again, and came back, and then there was another place where it didn't work. At which point I asked her if she would please dance, and I notated it in Laban's script, roughly, but notated it, so I knew what I had at home. So I went home and wrote it to the script. And I came back, and there was another place where it didn't coincide. And so I said, well, Tina, and I got up from the piano, and I said, at this point, my script says that you did thus and so. And she went, oh, I do remember something like that.
But you were choreographing as well as composing.
No, I wasn't choreographing. That was what she had done. I had notated it. But the point of the story is that it was custom in Diekman School to improvise sufficiently until a dance sort of gelled this way. And she was continuing to improvise beyond a certain point.
And interesting to me about that is that it seemed to me that Louis Horst, that was the one thing that drove him crazy. He would say to Martha, stop improvising and get to work and set the material so that he could set the music.
Yeah. Well, that was exactly what was happening to me.
Yeah.
And so I just notated what she did do and worked it out. We finally came to terms, of course. After that, she's
Well, the business of pure collaboration, what has been the best experience, Lou, for you in terms of feeling as though the music and the dance really work together?
well, one of them was Solstice with Dean Erden. In the first place, it was a fairly large cast in lengthy ballet with good soloists, and I conducted an orchestra enough size to fill an auditorium. And so that was a good one, and still remains so.
When was this?
Oh, let's see, it was 45 or 6, somewhere around there, I think, or maybe later. No. I don't know, I'd have to ask my archivist. I don't know anything about myself, he knows more about me than I do. But I just don't read at the end of the day. Songs for it.
So roughly 10,
Late 40s.
late 40s.
Yeah.
This is right after she left Martha.
Yes, in fact, she was just doing her early work. She'd already done Perilous Chapel, and I'd done the music for that, and she'd done some solos, with music
And
and his
with Louis,
recommendation
yeah.
of mine, too.
Well, David, when you entered the scene, did you feel the vibrancy of this collaborative effort, musicians and dancers?
Oh, absolutely.
put in a word here for the West Coast, or the left coast, as it's said. I worked and collaborated very strongly with Lester Horton and with Ella Litsky at that time, too, and Eleanor. At any rate, I did a dance with him, in which apparently in the book, I'm also credited with decor. So it was a collaboration all the way around. I remember structuring certain parts of that work for improvisation as well, and then some of it was actually composed, so that it was, and also Lester gave me the tunes for some sections. It was about Mexico, called Conquest, I think, or Tierra Libre. And that was one of the works I did for him, and with him very intently, as I had done in San Francisco with other dancers too. I hesitate to mention it, considering the way I look, but I was at one time almost the only available male lead dancer in San Francisco. I danced at the Current Theater, at the Opera House, and Sigmund St. Rose, and so on. I even had a small group of my own, which was going at the time. So I am not without kinetic background and choreographic background too. And that was one of the reasons I so much enjoyed working with Lester. He was so wide open about everything and so amusing about everything, you know. And Bella too. I remember that. Of course, there were terrible moments on the Mill stage, which was Lesser Hall. I think it was about as tall as this. And when Lester was choreographing, he smoked cigars. And very gradually, the level of smog would come. And then the dancers would start becoming ill. That would be the end of that session. At one point, Bella was asked by Lester to do such and such, and Bella said, Lester, I'm not hinged in that way. And he said, well, Bella, we'll rehinge you. It was a lot of fun working with Lester. Very vivid, too. Also, I remember in the studio, I think he had springs under the floor, something of that sort. And the dancers were accustomed to going way up here and staying for a while before they went down, you know. And what interested me about that was when he would do programs, well, as we did out at one of the groves in Los Angeles, for the first time, or maybe a couple times out from the studio, the dancers did go in there. They expected to, and they did. Which means that you have muscle memory sufficient to overcome a lack of springs in your floor. You know, it was amazing, too. I learned a lot from Lester. His connection with Native Americans, too, was very powerful. And also, I remember seeing movies of his production of The Rites of Spring in Hollywood Bowl. These were things that, had he been on the Eastern Seaboard, would have been, of course, a first class. A notice, I mean. But it was all out here. It was nonetheless exciting. And incidentally, my experience with Lester in the Mexican work later on became an interest with Jose Limon in his wanting to do a ballet about the Emperor Maximilian and Carlotta. And so I wrote a couple pieces. We didn't go on with that, but it obviously was from my own background. It was from working with Lester about similar material too. So I had a lot of experience, both as a dancer and as a musician, 2 dancers and 4 dancers, before I ever went to the right coast. As they say now.
So the two of you are really unusual species. You were musicians and dancers.
Yeah.
At a time when, after all, Graham was 38 when Eric Hawkins appeared on the scene in the Graham Company, and you appeared in 1940. It was 39 in Cunningham, and then 40, there you were. So that did change the chemistry of dance in some ways. You were very much pioneers in the mixing of sexes.
There's no
Yeah.
question that
I was just going to say, you were in it. I always had the feeling in New York that I was working with pupils.
Uh-huh.
That is to say, there was Jean, there was Eric, there was Merce, all of them were the pupils. And of course, Limon was the pupil, as it were, of Charles and, yeah. So I always had that feeling that I was working with the second generation, whereas you were in one of them.
But there was a polarity, I think, that came in with the mixing of the sexes in the groups. And at first, I think it was a problem for Martha because she'd had 16 girls. Incidentally, just parenthetically, the League of Composers commissioned a ballet for her with Edgar Barres, the Antigrouse, and there was a stairway that went up, and the girls, the name of the thing was Shapes of Ancestral Wonder. And the girls danced at the beginning, and then they got up on the stair, 2 to each step, and made a chair. And Miss Graham made her entrance with her head straight up and walked down on the arms.
Like Queen Victoria would have.
Yeah. Well, I asked her how she did it, and she said, well, they started off flat on the floor, and she looked. And then she began looking up, and they'd say, just 4 inches more. And she finally had built up the muscle memory to do the impossible thing. Also, my wife and I had, in the basement of our apartment, we had a Calder mobile that Martha had used in a ballet called Horizons. It was not done very often, but I never saw it, but it must have been quite something. The girls were tied, so if they went this way, the mobile went that way, and if they dropped, the mobile went up, and they would, it must have been, my wife said that it was a mare's nest. Keep them colliding with flying objects. Anyway, that was.
Well, I do believe that the West Coast was probably on maybe a stronger, in a stronger position to lead the field, and exactly what happened that got tilted. Because it seems to me that the old guard committees that were choosing and promoting new works and making major decisions in music were really pressing the younger talent closer into alliance. It seems to me that was happening in the 40s. And just to segue, it also seemed to me that Louis by now had almost had it. He was the conductor, but he was with Nina Honoroff, and he was really Eric had taken over in Louis' place, and Eric was hell-bent in his own choreography and collaboration. He was hell-bent to use American composers, and was really worked very hard, I think, to get into the commissions, the League of Composers, the Pan-American Association. When those things were formed, he knew how to filter into those composers' alliances. And there was, it seems to me, a reach that joining into the Copeland area, where the truer collaborators, as you're speaking about in the late 30s, early 40s, then the commissioning thing started taking over, and it seemed to change things quite a bit. Did you feel that way, or is that once you get out of it, or?
My only knowledge about that is that I remember visiting with Henry Cowell when Henry was doing a dance for Eric. So it was an Indian kind of thing, I recall. But then when I was commissioned by Eric for this work, I was given the house orchestra to work with, which was the oddest set of instruments I've ever run across. It took some doing to score for it at all. And I finally found out why. It was because Virgil Thompson had selected that group of instruments for the cherry tree story. I can't remember what Eric's name for it was, but anyway, that was it. And so Eric apparently decided to make that the house orchestra. And they were good. They were very good. And to this day, there's a house conductor. I thought they had people, contracted from everywhere, but that's not true. It's a house orchestra, house conductor. So that was quite fun. But I guess it's Virgil Thompson who set that up. And as far as I can tell, I haven't heard Virgil's score. I'm sure it's very good. But as far as I can tell, the best use of it has been Alan O'Donnell's. He simply wrote solos for all those wonderful players. It was wonderful.
So things did change as composers got more organized. Choreographers were pulling themselves together, and commissions were being sought. And
These were commissions, most of them were before the dance was done. I mean, the commissions were after the dance, not before the dance was done. So they danced to the music, but like Doris Humphrey got Wallingford Rieger to do New Dance. Martha had Wallingford Rieger do Chronicles, Henry Cowell, Deep Song. But these were all done to the dance. But then the commissions began.
and it did change the chemistry. It
Oh, yes.
changed it.
Yeah.
You know,
But before that, they were very distinct. Well, Rieger, Horst, I mean, Cowell,
when-
yeah,
and-
Norman Lloyd.
About 48, yeah. Well, it's interesting about the Della Gioia. Let's say from 1940 to 1948, you were there until 46.
Right.
At the point when Appalachian Spring, Della Gioia, Diversion of Angels came about, it has seemed to me that these composers knew very much how they wanted to write and what they wanted to write, and they were not to be dictated to. So it seems to me there is a different kind of score, a different kind of attitude. Did you feel that?
Yes. Well, the fact that you were commissioning music that stood. Some of the stuff that was done before wouldn't have been exactly hair-raising without the movement. I mean, some of it was pretty thin. I don't know, well, Louis' score for Primitive Mysteries, which is to me one of the great dance scores, I would not go out of my way to hear in a concert. No.
But it's wonderful.
Oh, superb score.
But it was true that Aaron Copland definitely had a suite for Appalachian Spring as well. That was his concert version. He was always thinking in terms of concertizing these works as well as having them be commissioned and being played with the work. Do you think that was a safe device for composers? Did you find yourself getting into that mode of you'll make the work so that it will stand on its own and whether
Well,
the
I've always
choreography
tried
works?
that.
You have.
When I did Solstice, for example, I wrote it to counts from beginning to end, and it's never changed. It was done in the dance over and over again, and it's been played as concert piece ever since. Recorded as well.
So would you say the ultimate goal, let's say for this group, is to make a work that will service the dance but stand on its own? And then
I would think so. I think all arts ought to be firm. Well done.
I'd like to bring up one other thing and maybe take it back to the middle. We're looking at the 30s and 40s, 46 for you, and really you were writing for the Herald Tribune 45, Lou. So you were really doing all kinds of things.
I went there, I think 42, and I stayed till about 52. So I did 10 years in New York.
Until your nervous breakdown.
I think I was terrific.
You also say reproduction in art ultimately spells sterility. He sees the forever present human voice and use of percussion as the two safe mediums to use, mostly because amateurs can reign in those areas.
Yeah, that's true.
And then you ask, this is 1940, well, where are our Ives and Cowell and Ruggles performances? And you end by saying, composers must get to work. Do you still feel that? Or?
Yeah, and in fact, I feel that, and I keep telling younger people, that the chorus of American music is constantly younger people inviting friends of theirs and playing their own music with their friends' music, and then someone in that group likes the smell of printer's ink, and an edition is formed. And so it goes, and this has been going since the last century. It's still going, I think, too. Nowadays, of course, you can put out a CD quite quickly. That's an added component.
Added component, but it has become one of the, almost the only component. I think that musicians sitting here work electronically an awful lot. How many of you, lots, right, work with electronic keyboards?
My condolences.
You say here in 1940 that reproduction in art ultimately spells sterility. Would you say that we need to work at getting back what Norman White used to call live performances?
Yeah, I think I misworded that. I think I probably meant repetition and imitation.
Of other styles?
Yeah, right.
But what about the electronic age?
I don't know anything about it. I have a computer which my archivist uses enormously, and I use it simply because I was a calligrapher, and I no longer am because I can't depend on my right arm or on my right hand. I had a couple vertebrae, wing accident. And so I have made 4 type fonts, or 5, and I'm at work on another one, which I then use in the computer. I only use it as a letter writing machine because I like to use my own letter forms. And as I say, I'm halfway through it, and with that I will have completed all the major forms of the Roman letters. That's all I use it for. I couldn't possibly use it for things that my archivist uses, or anybody else. I don't know. No modems, no email, no what's the next step? Website. Well, that's supposed to be being set up for me because a teacher is going to include me in a class and I have to have a website. That's his problem. But no, I'm
So maybe we should open this up at this point and have you all ask questions.
Well, I don't know how much of a tangent this might be, but at that risk, I would like to ask about notation itself. And I was struck with this when you talked about the ballet solstice. Here we have a work, let us assume, I don't know, but let us assume that the dance was also a wonderful piece, as well as the music. And yet, in this day, your music is being recorded. Do we have any evidence of this dance? You know,
Of the what?
Of the dance, of Gene Erdman's dance.
yes, it's out on video.
Yes, I'll tell you, all Gene Erdman's dances are been
Yeah.
issued in very, very well done archival videos, very expensive. The library has them. Yes,
That's great. That's good news, and that's the power of video. And I guess the question I was raising is that in the history of music and dance, one wonders how much the lack of a notation system that's been used by dancers has affected the preservation of dances. For instance, ballet russe. You know, so many of those scores became mainstays of the concert repertoire for music. What happened to the choreography? You know,
Well,
and all over the history of dance, that similar thing. The music survives and the dance didn't. And I wonder how much of that is notation.
well, this is my reason for pushing Robin script. Also, I know friends in New Zealand and here who read Baroque script very well and can reproduce court dances from Louis XIV or whatever. And that's a beautiful script too. But I have actually taught beginning stages of Laban script, and I think it's important that dancers become literate. not going to hurt them as dancers, you know. And so they can still get up and dance, and still sing. But I think it's important that they do that. Love and Scripps couldn't do anything. So I've often thought it should go with a new tractor, tell you which to pull and push.
Yeah.
This is the last thing the thing about imitation. Copeland told me a story on Stravinsky that when he was teaching, I think it was at Yale, when he did the book, the poetics music, that a student had gone to him and said, "Master, I'm so influenced by you that I don't know who I am. I don't know who's writing." And Stravinsky said, "Well, there's no such thing as a bad influence." He said, "Be influenced by absolutely everything." He said, "You excrete what you don't need and you digest what you do." He said, "I think there is no such thing as a bad influence." I said, "No, wait a minute. That's not true." He said, "There's one piece of music by one composer, and if you're influenced by it, you'll be finished." And students said, "What is it?" He said, "Your last success."
Yeah, I wanted to ask Louis, you talked a little bit about the Great Divide. You talked a little about the Great Divide where you said the co-rhythmic
Yeah,
music
right.
and non-co-rhythmic. I wanted you to talk a little
Well,
bit about that and your path through that whole
Okay. I'm a believer in song and dance. To me, that's what it's about. But there came a time, and I think we can find it. It's when music and dance separated. For many centuries, for the most part, music and dance have been co-rhythmic, and they still are to a large degree. But there came a time, I think largely because poor John had a terrible sense of kinesis, it was awful, that he preferred not to be co-rhythmic. And and having introduced both John and Merce to the EJ, I am in some sense guilty. But I think that's the great divide, is the co-rhythmic and then the place where there's no rhythm common at all. And then now again, co-rhythmic dance is not regarded as awful. Yes?
Well, I think that's very, what I deal with an issue a lot in my own education for dancers, the sense that there's a lack of this third place, this shared sense of meter. It's a hard thing to get across to young dancers and choreographers. You're recounting your scores, which worked well by themselves as absolute pieces of music that were previously accompanied choreography. What's needed for that to happen is a choreographer with metric sense. I think when you're working in the kind of film music mode that contemporary choreographers, many of them like to work in,
Oh yes,
I found that more difficult than how to do, and I'm envious in a way of what you do.
Yeah, well, I don't deny the influence of movies and television on both dance and music. Only a few years ago, I noticed when new scores were being played for young people to hear them, for one thing, I noticed that they were chopped like clippings in movies and in television. It was very clear that influence was prevailing. I don't listen to it much anymore, so I don't know what's happening. But it's a lack of organic development, as Virgil Johnson would have said, and I miss it. I can't follow that number of flashes, and don't see why I should. Yes.
You just touched briefly about Humphrey Wyman and Jose Limon sensibility. Did either of you work with Limon at any point, or with Doris Humphrey? Did you work with?
I did not work with Doris or Charles, no. As I say, I worked briefly.
But with Jose Limon?
Yeah, we were planning a possible ballet on the subject of Maximilian and Carlotta. But it didn't work out. I have a couple pieces which are now being revived for performance, just as such, from that effort. My archivist discovered them in a trunk somewhere. But no, I did not win. Just admired.
David, did you ever study with Charles Weidman, or?
No, I just knew them pretty well.
How would you describe the differences in their musical differences?
Between Humphrey
And Graham?
oh,
Yeah.
not as vast a difference as they probably thought there was. That there was a lot of tension. But I thought that the score that Rieger did for New Dance could easily have been used by Graham.
And it was, by the way. They used it for a reconstruction of Celebration on a season.
Was really?
Yeah.
And it worked very well. Unless you remember the New Dance of Humphrey. Then it was a little disconcerting.
Well, so it wasn't off the mark.
Did you take classes at Bennington with Humphrey, or you weren't allowed to? You just
No, we were allowed to.
You did.
Yeah.
And
It wasn't,
did it feel different phonetically, or?
we didn't have, yes, quite. The thing
Curry.
you said about the downbeat,
Yeah.
I think one of the things about the Graham technique that I liked was the upbeat, the and being in the pelvis, and the downbeat being the movement that it created. And she used to be very strong about that.
I know, and then it melted. I first learned it when it was pretty rough.
Yeah. I used to rub Martha's feet and give her a motor mouth. And she just go on and on and on. And one day she was saying, when she was up at Rochester, trying to find a new language, she said, I asked myself one day, where was I conceived? Where was I born? What was the first thing I did? What's the last thing I'll do? What's the source of my passion? Martha, you're going to be in trouble. If you build a technique around the indivisible point of the human being, it's going to be the pelvis. And even as things began to dissolve, seemingly, in a class, if she'd ask you to raise an arm and she couldn't see it, the and before the downbeat, you were in trouble.
Yes.
You talked about, kind of about the connection between music and dance in terms of form, how you were working, and also in terms of rhythm, how you were working. Are there other ways that you attempted to connect to the dance that perhaps are more fundamental, or other ways that are perhaps less fundamental, as your work kind of proceeded? That's just kind of curious about that.
Well, it's been so long, almost a couple of months since I've had
Yes,
that I don't know. I'm still on tenterhooks, wondering what I'm going to see when Mark Morris does a work of mine next. And I'm sure looking forward to it. But I think Mark is marvelous. And for a musician to work with him, it's almost total heaven. Because he's really skilled always.
But I'm not speaking particularly,
I worked on most
I'm not speaking particularly of, say, this last piece that you did, but as you look over the body of your work that you've done with dancing, a lot of ways.
You mean with Mark and me?
No, not Martha.
In your whole career.
In the body of your work. In the 40 years or 50 years that you've been making music for dances, aren't there some ways?
I've just been going on. Occasion arose to write symphonies. I wrote 4 of them. I've decided that's enough. I'm not going to do that anymore. Right now, I've been writing for Asian instruments. And as a matter of fact, there is something there. If I'm left to my own devices and don't have a commission to turn out or something I've agreed to do, what I'm always doing is writing gamelan pieces. Constantly. I love it. I love to hear it. I feel it. And that's what I do. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
The time period,
I'm a wretched.
the time period that we're talking about, the 30s and the 40s, was such a wonderful, fruitful period for American composers. And then the divide happened that you talked about with commission pieces with Martha and so forth, of, say, high stature composers who weren't necessarily closely identified with dance, but who now were being commissioned to write for dance. And then it seems to me, just looking at music history and the way that we're taught about it, but there's this great period from, say, the mid-50s to almost 1970 where, or beyond, where American composers were really out of the limelight, and suddenly American music was all dominated by European kind of Schoenberg disciples and Weber disciples and things like that, Dalla Piccola and all these kind of people. And then, you know, this new stream has picked up again dance influence with American composers with Steve Reich and Philip Glass and those people. And I'm just wondering what you think about that. I mean, what happened in that sort of 15-year period? You were still active, John Cage was still active, but there was this...
I still answer. What happened?
I mean, you were a voice, and he was a voice, but there were so many who just sort of dropped outside.
Well, yeah, but as Virgil Thompson pointed out, music changes every 30 years. And mostly the instruments do too. And I would say that the majority of new composers now use electronic instruments, which means that the so-called acoustic instruments, or what I simply refer to as instruments, are no longer what you are using. So that's about a 30-year period from the last adventure. What you will do, I don't know, but I sure wish you luck. Good composing. You bet.
David, any last thoughts, last remarks about what happened in the 50s and 60s and what you see in the future?
Just one of the things about the period that I found so wonderful was it was passionate. That, not that it isn't anymore, but sometimes I don't see a great deal of dance. But I hope decoration doesn't take over. It seems to me that the ritual base of dance music theater should never be lost. That it's done to make something happen, whether it's in the earth, or the sky, in ourselves. The ritual is the core of passionate, meaningful art.
I just thought of one thing that happened. Certainly we had composers, I don't know, Lou, if you realize that Larry has been Bela Lewitsky's music director
really?
for
Oh,
2
my
decades, so things have continued. It's not as if good music stopped. Wonderful creativity has gone on. But a major thing that happened was the Ford McNeil Lowry and the Ford Ford Foundation and a lot of money going into ballet and balancing and that emphasis on ballet in the schools and so forth. I think that that was bound to have, what do you think? An influence on how much attention was paid to modern dance and music for modern dance.
Oh, well, I don't know about that. I'm under the impression, probably because I haven't been too closely attached, that the ballet and the modern dance are very much close together now.
But I'm talking about in the 50s. And that's exactly when all the Ford Foundation money went into
I see.
the ballet.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about that. Sorry.
Well, to wrap up, I'd like to say that I think the other important thing that is happening right now is that Musicians for Dance now have this organization. And here to the organization for, first of all, bringing Lily Davis here to the scene and presenting this channel. And here, and congratulations to you all.
Yes. Thank you.
Larry, stay. No.
Yeah, we're going to be going somewhere else, but let's just stay put for a minute and let me gather my brains.
How long will that take?
Next Friday, no. There's a rehearsal, but we just need to regroup and get organized a little bit.
This is when we separate. I don't know what I'm going to be finished.
I'm going to go back to the
I'm going back to the
rest.
I'm going to go back. That's why I'm driving. That's why I'm
You're going to go? Oh, okay. All right.
I better go my Yeah, I need to. No, Phil. Yeah, just dry. Yeah.
I wonder if you have any more of the water bottle. You know,
Those both are filled on the table.
Yeah, but
Nobody
it's
used
okay. I'll just ask.
Oh, no, I still have mine. Have another swig.
I can't stay in the West buildings all day.
That's right. Visibility.
I can't help it. Right.
You're not going to use that. You're not going to use that one. Yeah. Because everything's over. Oh, except that there's that improvisation lecture for you, isn't it?
Yeah, in the music school.
Whatever that is.
We don't need to make any equipment changes for playtime to come up. Let's start with playtime then now.
Tokyo, whoa.